Who is ready for some real football? This guy. That's who, and I know you guys are as well. Syracuse, Ohio, the season opener approaches. Man, we have been in depth at training camp. We've been doing live podcasts after training camp. And it just felt like when you're in the midst of that, it's like, when's the real football going to be here? It's here. And we are so happy that it is. But before we do take that step forward into real football, I really like what we did today. So Emily Leiker, if you have not read her story about Fran Brown on syracuse.com, how dare you? You really need to get on that. Emily put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the story over the past few months, in depth, family members. She went to Camden, New Jersey, spoke with so many people that know Fran, whether that's family, friends, coaches, that really gets to the heart of the kind of person he is. That's important to know for a number of reasons, but we're going to attempt to kind of answer the question as best as we can. That's hard to answer, and what kind of coach he's going to be, by really getting into what kind of person he is. So you will certainly get some tidbits from Emily's story, from what we've heard in press conferences, what we've seen Fran do in the community, what DART means, and really try to get to the heart of the man himself. What I really liked about what we did today was kind of the back and forth discussion that Emily and I had, but also Emily shared some kind of from the cutting room floor sound bites that did not make either the videos that are up in Emily's interviews with Fran and family and her story as well. So you're kind of getting, remember back in the old days of Blu-ray and DVD, kind of the deleted scenes that you would get? That's what you're getting in this podcast today. So exclusive audio that's not out there anywhere else, that didn't even make Emily's well-researched stories and video. So, man, I'm so ready for football, real football. But we're going to make one last attempt here to tell you who Fran Brown is, what he's done in the 9 months since he took over the job, which has really been unprecedented, what he's been able to do. And then we'll start to see some real football on Saturday. So our Syracuse Sports Insiders, always an important part of this conversation, and there is no better time to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. Thanks to everybody that's jumped on board during training camp. The season is here. You get breaking news from us. You get exclusive tidbits from us. My opinions first. The coolest thing, though, is as a Syracuse Sports Insider, you can text me directly. I text you directly. The questions and comments, not only just that you want to hear in general about Syracuse sports, your comments featured on this podcast, your questions answered. I love the back and forth that we have going with our Syracuse Sports Insiders. You should become one today if you're not already. It's so easy to do. You just text the word orange to 315-847-3895. It's free for 2 weeks. See what we're doing. Check it out. And then it's just $3.99 a month after that. Less than $1 a week for all that Syracuse sports insight. And we're right here in the heart of football season. So we'll be texting you during the week, certainly on game days as well. We're still trying to kind of figure out what we're going to do on game day, but that's the beauty of it. We'll try it. We'll see what works, what doesn't. But the most important thing is you are texting me and telling us what you want to read about, what you want to hear about, and it's all right there as a Syracuse Sports Insider. So sign up today if you haven't. So we're going to bring in our conversation with Emily here, but as we've been noting here, now we can't really do this on the live podcast because that's a different format, but we want to feature your original music on this podcast. Normally, what we have done so far in doing this is I have solicited for you to send me your music, and then I get in touch with you and we work it out. In this case, I asked this band if I could feature their music today. It's a local band from right here in Syracuse, New York, called Paper Rabbit. They are one of my new favorite bands that I've discovered no matter where they're from. It just makes me happy that they're a Syracuse originated band. They are fantastic. All the details are in the show notes about how you can download their new album, which just came out this past month. It's fantastic. It's some of the best new music I've discovered. Again, no matter where they're from. So check out the show notes so you know where you can download their new album, where you can find them on YouTube. This is one of their new singles. It's called Strangers. So we're going to play a little clip for you here before we bring in Emily, and then you can hear the entire song at the end of the podcast. All right. So keep your local music coming. But in this case, I asked them if I could play their music, and they're fantastic. So let's take a listen to that. And then Emily, Leiker, and I go in depth on Fran Brown.
So Brent, we've reached game week. We're a few days before the game.
Finally.
And I think finally, we're both excited for game week. We're both excited for the game. But I think everyone's kind of feeling like there is this like kind of final wave of like anticipation of there's so much unknown that we're headed towards. And you got this new guy who everyone's been watching for 9 months build this program, who's built so much hype in the off season. And so I think we just kind of wanted to go over, like, why has Fran Brown built this program how he has so far? Why has the way he built it incited so much excitement around this program, right? And just kind of look at like the how, the why, the what around this program and Fran Brown's structure of it entering game one before, we have football things to talk about. And as Fran said yesterday or on Monday, he said, it's a tough job. The media is tough. Like, you're cool with me now, but we'll see come Saturday. And I mean, he's right. Like, we could come out of Saturday and have not an entirely different perspective right off of one game, but we're going to have a different perspective, kind of.
Well, I'll just say this before we get into it. That's what I'm most fascinated by, because Fran Brown takes over in 2024. The last coach that took over was Dino in 2016. We are in a way different world now than we were then in terms of college football, expectations, the portal, NIL, all this stuff that has evolved in just the last few years, let alone since 2016. And I think of what Scott Shafer said when he took over. I think of what Doug Marrone said when he took over. And now Fran. Fran, to me, is in a shorter honeymoon, as much as everybody just is over the moon with this program right now. And they should be for a lot of ways, because he has injected a lot of things in the last 8-9 months to show receipts to do it. How long does that last in an era where patience is thinner? And frankly, I think it's fair that it's thinner just based on what you can do to accelerate the process of rebuilding a program. And I think you've got as much insight into this as anybody with the story that you wrote on syracuse.com about Fran, which if people still have not read, get on that, people. You got to check that out. But also some things that didn't make the story that we're going to go over here that kind of tell the tale of what we think he is going to be as a coach. And as he has said, Emily, a number of times, he's not building a football team, he's building a program, right? So what kind of insight can we gain into that? I think you've got some.
Yeah, and I want to start in the past a little bit, which is largely what was covered in my story, right? It's about his upbringing in Camden and his family and kind of the tough love he received throughout growing up. But I want to kind of set the tone just from Fran's beginning of his football career with this nice little anecdote from his Uncle Charlie, who was a big piece in the story about his first time taking Fran to Little League.
It really put a buzz in the city.
Was there a moment that either of you, maybe in high school or it could have been before, like were really like, wow, this moment is telling me football is Fran's future, whether it be playing or coaching or whatever?
Probably his first Little League game.
That's his territory.
About it?
So it's funny because it's something that I'll never forget, because I was there, from the very start of taking him to his very first practice. But his coach, Coach Drip, had made him a cornerback. Told Francis that he was going to be in the corner and told him this is his zone. He said, "This is your zone. So anything that come in this zone, this is yours." So Fran was just looking at him like, "All right." So as they get out there on the field, kid came in his zone, but then he crossed out and left. Turned up the center. So Fran just looked at him. Because it wasn't in his zone, and the coach. So after the play, the coach like, "Why didn't you let him go in there?" He said, "You told me this is my zone." So he understood it, but then he understood right there at that moment to use your own brain while you're out there. So they really.
So that clip, obviously, I'll get your reaction to it in a minute there, Brent,
it.
but shows a little, obviously, as a child, you have a little bit of a literalism to you, a realism. But I think Fran also, as much as we maybe see him as an optimist with, right, like wanting to get to a playoff, thinking they're going to get to a national championship year run, whatever. Like, I do think Fran is largely a realist, and that comes out in how he's kind of building this program. And I thought that was a good clip to kind of show, like, there's been some tangible evidence of that since he was little. Would you kind of agree that there is some realism to how he approaches this?
Yeah, I that's consistent with what we've heard from him. So it's funny how he was that way when he was little and how life comes full circle. He starts as a cornerback and becomes a cornerbacks coach. And that's where he really made his hay as a coach. It certainly as a recruiter as well. But I just love how that comes full circle here. And this is why I love these stories and the tidbits that you're going to provide us here. And I mean, think how good that it is. And it didn't make the story. So that tells you how much great stuff you got that did make the story. But, as somebody who has a kid in college now, like, you're going through those moments in life. Like, what are those things that pop, those things that you remember like they were yesterday? It's really interesting that's what Uncle Charlie remembered that first time he played football. But I'm really struck by Fran is still like that. He is still direct and literal like that. So it's funny how you're shaped when you're little and things still come about when, you're a grown man now and taking over as head coach of a football team. That was pretty cool.
Right. And, this is a kid who's played football from a young age, who's been around football from a young age. But I think even for all of us who have been around football since we were little, like, there is always a moment, right, where you really fall in love with the sport. Brent, do you have a moment like that?
For football or sports in general?
I'll save sports in general.
I remember like it was yesterday. My dad took me to a Syracuse St. John's basketball game, right? And I'm 4 years old, I believe at the time. This was early 80s. The Dome had just opened. And, when you're 4, like, you're looking around like there's the mascot and like you're not watching the game, right? But I just love that feeling of going to something bigger and just the event feel of it. But then you get a little older and you start to appreciate the sports. So the moment where I really started to appreciate sports was 87 football and starting to understand the game. And as that season built, Emily, they go 4-0, 5-0, 6-0. Like, this team they could go undefeated. It was that Syracuse, West Virginia game, 1987, famous play, Michael Owens, 2-point conversion, takes it in, and Syracuse goes undefeated to finish the regular season. They end up tying Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. But that was like the first moment where I was like, whoa, wait, this means something. And I understood what that was. It wasn't just, hey, it's fun and we're going to the game. Like, I understood that. Like, I knew, like, oh, they're going for 2, and this is why they're going for 2. And, like, your brain just changes how you watch sports. So, ever since then, I've been hooked.
Well, and I think that type of story is one of the first things we heard from Brown at his press conference, right? And it's that Syracuse, I believe, Wisconsin game at the Meadowlands that he says he goes to when he's really young, and he paints this whole picture of like remembering where he was up in the stands. And I think Mark Frank over from the AP asked, like, well, do you remember exactly where you sat? And he was like, no, but like he had this clear picture of that moment. And I think it is so interesting and just compelling that was a moment that involved Syracuse. I mean, he could have seen any number of schools being down in New Jersey, or any number of football teams like Rutgers, Temple. He could have gone and watched the Giants, who his mom was a fan of. But it's just kind of this like weird serendipity of that moment. And of course, like, maybe he picked that moment. But again, like the authenticity of like how he presents those types of things, like it very much feels like, okay, you got football, but really you got Syracuse football.
Yeah.
Was a moment that he fell in love with this sport. And so go ahead.
Well, I was going to sorry to interrupt you, but I think what's interesting about that, Emily, so here you got a kid in Camden, New Jersey, and the experience is going to the Meadowlands, which wouldn't be anything weird, right? But it's not the Giants, it's not the Jets, it's not Rutgers, it's Syracuse, Wisconsin. And I don't know if you caught this recently, but Fran was wearing that T-shirt. So Bert, shout out to Bert down at Scholars and Champs, which is a vintage store in downtown Syracuse, found him that T-shirt from the Kickoff Classic, and Fran was wearing it recently. It all kind of comes full circle again. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And so it's just, you have those two moments that kind of align. And I think too, like obviously the other thing we heard very early on, and that's been important to Fran, is that like he sees Camden in Syracuse now that he's been up here, obviously, and has been in the community a little bit more. And so there's so much from his past. And again, like I get a lot more in depth in this in the piece itself. So I don't want to spend too much time bogged down on it here, but like, Syracuse is not just like some program that he stumbled into a head coaching job. Like whether it be divine intervention, whether it just be Fran setting his mind on something from that first game that he watched that he remembers so vividly, like Syracuse is a destination for him and was like a kind of lamppost, I think, in terms of his football upbringing. And I think the fact that he grew up with it, right, is why he has such a strong sense of connection to wanting to bring back the alumni and wanting to include these like former coaches like Pasqualoni. And we know that he has that letter that he got while at Baylor from George DeLeon in his office that I wrote about back in December. And so there's so many ties to his past that then I think illustrate why he is so obsessed with Syracuse's past as well, right? Like Syracuse's past is Fran Brown's past to a degree. Like there is overlap there. That's really interesting to consider. And at least like not a lot of college football coaches necessarily have that. Like in Syracuse's history, Brent, like who would you say maybe comes the closest to being like, okay, there are ties here that kind of bind these two people or this entity and this person?
I think the guy that jumps right to mind is Doug Marrone because, you know, he played here, and Doug Marrone takes over in 2008 off of the Greg Robinson era, which was just an outright disaster. It was the worst 4 years in Syracuse football history. It set back the program even beyond that. But Doug Marrone had skin in the game. He came in here. He mentioned, and it's funny how you talk about this now and the path that Doug Marrone has taken since then. But at the time, it was a dream job. And I remember Tim Green being in that room and Floyd Little being in that room and alumni saying, you know, we had to go back to our roots, right? And bring in a Syracuse guy who's got skin in the game. It felt like that, too, when John Wildhack took over as athletic director because Mark Coyle, the AD, who hired Dino Babers, by the way, was only here for like 7 months and left. So when in doubt, Emily, you circle back. Look at the coaches that are up there now. Felicia Leggett-Jack, Gary Gate, Kayla Trainer, obviously Adrian Autry. Like you could always get a little more leverage from your fan base when you go with an alum. You brought it up, though. Fran's not an alum, but it feels like he appreciates this job. He's got roots and connections to Syracuse in this job. He's not just taking a job, right? He's not just taking and nobody would blame him if he did, by the way. It's a head coaching job in the Power Four. These are rare opportunities, but it just, I think, even though I mentioned the shorter honeymoon in college football generally, and I still believe that, by Fran telling these stories and demonstrating to people that he's got skin in the game and he cares, like that goes a long way.
Right. Well, and I think people just appreciate shared history, right? Like it's much easier for a Syracuse fan, I would imagine, to sit and listen to Brown's introductory press conference and recall a game like that, recall names like that they themselves watched and fell in love with and immediately go, yeah, this is our guy. Like, this is our guy. Than for someone random to come in who doesn't have a connection to the area and kind of just is like spouting platitudes about like, oh, well, Syracuse is great and it's a rich history. No, like he understands the history. And so I think that's kind of part one is that these pasts overlap, and that's why he's been able to establish such a strong connection with alumni, such a strong connection with the community, and why all of that has been so important to a degree in building the program here into a community inclusive program in a way that it at least hasn't felt like it's been as much in the past 2 years since I've been here. So then you kind of move into, okay, well, he said all that in his intro. We kind of got that background in his intro. Well, what has he done in the 9 months since then? Like that has continued to be like, okay, like he's not just saying these things, he's doing it. Brent, what has stood out to you or surprised you the most that he was able to accomplish since he's been here?
Honestly, it's the recruits that he got for 2024 that we're going to see on the field, right? It's one thing to look ahead to get recruits and to commit for the class of 2025. This guy had like 2.5 weeks to recruit for this year. And as noted as a recruiter as he is, maybe I shouldn't be surprised by this, but the depth chart comes out this week, Emily. Marcellus Barnes Jr. is on there. James Hurd is on there. My guy, Yassine Willis, is on there. Freshmen brought in the spring, they're on the field immediately. To get that kind of talent to get on the field is incredible to me. Now, look, that doesn't brush aside getting names like Kyle McCord and Fidel Diggs, but that's the portal, right? If you have the right connection, and frankly, if you have the check to cut to some of these guys who got some nice NIL money to come in, you can come to a place like Syracuse, especially when there was an opportunity to be a starting quarterback, as I mentioned, in a Power 4 league. But that, to me, is the most surprising thing. And it's so important, Emily, because it's funny that I'm citing specifics here because I think back to Dino, right? Dino comes in, and he had to do this. It's not a criticism. It's just how things are different. He comes in and just lit up that room with the press conference that he had. Remember the close your eyes speech, and our offense is going to be this, and our defense is going to be this, and our special teams is going to be this. Fran hasn't done that. If you really look at it, correct me if I'm wrong, when he talks football, Emily, we're not talking about specifics. It's a pro-style offense. Well, what does that mean? We know what the defense is. It's a 4-2-5, but there's still some things that maybe we haven't heard or seen about that when we watch this team play Ohio. We're like, whoa, what's that, right? Everything has been kind of a broader view on things, but the specifics, the receipts, are the players, are the most important thing that he's bringing in. That, frankly, has been the thing that surprised me the most, because even in this era we're in, I thought it would be it would take a little longer to bring in recruits that had that kind of impact, and right away you're going to see guys on the field.
Right. Well, and I think the kind of the crop he brought in, it tells us kind of two things in my opinion. One, it tells you just how good of a recruiter he is and how authentic and focused on connection he is. Not just in like him bringing in those crop, but then right, like what we've heard from all of them. But two, it also tells us that Syracuse can be a destination. And it just kind of depends on how you're selling it and if you believe in it. And it kind of makes you question, like, was that belief there over the past 8 years that this could be something more than just a former Big East program in central New York that like is known for its basketball? Like, Fran wants to make this a football school and is selling kids who want to go to football schools like Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and all those SEC programs that he flipped a lot of those kids from or brought them over from places like Ohio State, Texas A&M. Like, he is turning Syracuse into a football destination really just by himself, at least so far. In the months since, obviously, we have seen like community buy-in helps with that, and the NIL dollars obviously helped with that. But like, just in like looking at like when I arrived here and like getting into like my first season here, which was that 2022 season under Dino, and entering this season, like the investment in football is just so much different. And I don't know, like, if there's like, when would be the last time you would recall feeling like football was this invested in, both by the community, but also by the school, I'd say.
See, that made me think of something in that I think as much as fans watch players, it's the coaches that are there forever. You think of Jim Boeheim, was here forever. And it was that, you could set your watch by Jim Boeheim coaching Syracuse basketball literally for decades. Dick McPherson took over Syracuse football in a somewhat similar circumstance. Syracuse was worse off than what Fran Brown's inheriting, frankly. I mean, they've been to bowl games. It's not like they've been under 500 for a decade straight, but not too many of them, right? So it is similar. What made it so electric starting in the mid-'80s, really right through to 2004, Emily. When you were saying that, I'm like, people have seen that and remember it, but there's enough of it, 20 years basically of a generation that they've only heard old stories from old guys like me. They're like, no, I'm telling you kids, back in 92, they were great. But you want to believe in the coach. As good as a coach as Dick McPherson was, Dick McPherson could have run for mayor in this town and won in a landslide because he was a personality, right? Fran is not that, but he connects with people. He's genuine. He's real. He's low key at his press conferences and in public, but there's just something about him that you spend time with him. And I'm going to use the old cliche here, but it's the one you keep hearing from people. I want to run through a wall for that guy. And he's not in there like light you up like a Coach Mack would and the big booming personality, or even how Dino was in a way. Scott Shafer was the prototypical football coach, in your face, or we're going to go out there, we're going to lock the doors, or we're going to run down your throat, right? Like, Fran doesn't need to do that. He just has this cool confidence about him that makes you want to believe in the coach. And all the things we're talking about help, being in the community, having that knowledge of past Syracuse and being able to connect with people. People want to believe in that, especially with how quickly players come and go. Who is the person you set your watch by? It's the coach. Mm-hmm. And I think people are yearning for that again. They had it maybe a little bit with Dino, and then it faded out. And by the end, people were just ready to turn the page. So it's believing in a coach and believing in something in addition to the wins and losses that are so important.
Yeah, and you mentioned that word real in there, which again is like the root of realism and being a realist, which is something we already talked about in the past. And I think kind of some other ways we've seen that in like what he's done present tense is I think a lot about the staff he's built. And Monday at his press conference, he was highlighting again, like, guys on his staff have been around college football a lot longer than him. Like, Nixon's 20 years plus, Michael Johnson is 20 years plus, Dale Williams is 20 years plus. I think Elijah Robinson is 15. Fran's like only in his 12th year of coaching. Like, he is still very young for a football coach. And, college football is a game of egos. There are a lot of egos in college football. But Fran has been very upfront about, like, I don't have all the answers.
Right. He's
built his staff to be able to collaborate with them and gain their knowledge to not only make himself better, but then to hopefully push them onto better places. And so this quote that he had Monday, I'll just read off. We don't have the audio of it, but he was talking about, he also reaches out to the coaches that he's worked with previously. Like, he was like, I gave Kirby Smart a call this morning and just talked to him about like the game and like got some final tips from him and made some joke about shoes as well. But he said, I just reach out to guys. I'm not afraid to reach out. I do not have all the answers. I probably don't even have half of them. I just try to reach out and get as much information as I can get. Try to be an information seeker and not a giver. And I think that's a real big key in what could make this season successful on a level that like people don't necessarily expect out of a first year head coach, right? Like, there's always doubt about a first year head coach. And then when you add in like that they've literally had no coordinator experience, and like, of course, like Fran's done other things in his career that like he's competent as a coach. And we heard about his natural born football IQ from Uncle Charlie there at the beginning. But this sense of having no stubbornness and being willing to collaborate is going to, and I say this confidently, is going to lessen the bumps that he encounters as a first year coach this season, I would say. Would you agree with that,
I
Brent?
totally agree. But do you think Uncle Charlie would come on the pod, by the way? I would love to just hang with Uncle Charlie.
Maybe. We could see.
Yeah. You got that connection now. Shoot him a text. Uncle Charlie, come on. We love you. You hit the best word to describe this, though, Emily. It's ego. Fran has already demonstrated, and we'll see if this plays out, is when the bullets start flying. But people have asked me, and I'm sure they've asked you, what kind of coach is he going to be? Calling plays in the heat of the moment. My answer has been, don't worry about him. We're not worry, but what's going to tell the tale is he said it. He has Jeff Nixon with all that experience. Elijah Robinson. Now, it doesn't have quite as much as experience as Nixon, but has enough, has been there and done that. And it feels like, Emily, Fran is going to put his ego aside and let those two call the game and let those two coach, and Fran will play whatever role he needs to play. Compare him to Dino, who Dino was calling the offense. Dino would not let his assistant coaches talk to the media. Dino had time management issues that are well documented, and we can go back and litigate 8 years of football. I get that. But Fran's willingness to, it feels like, put that ego aside and let his coaches coach, and we'll see how that goes as the season goes along. But I think he understands that. He admitted it. I've only been doing this for 12 years. He doesn't have as much experience, and he's not trying to override them. There's so much ego in college football, and the head coach just feels like they're the ones that have to do everything. I think Fran realizes it's smarter to delegate, and it's smarter to bring in smart people and let them coach and see how it all pans out. Like, that sounds simple, but there's so many coaches that just won't do that.
Right. Let them coach, let them talk to media, like you mentioned, like let them have their,
let them shine. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And let them shine, but also let them have their moments where they have to take responsibility for things, right? Like,
that's the other thing. Yeah.
There are going to be moments that someone has to be accountable for this season. And we'll get into it in a minute, because we have to talk about Dart as we're talking about Fran's program building. But the final thing I'll say about just like his coaching and the coaching staff he's built is, like, I asked on Monday, like, oh, who's going to be on the headset with Kyle McCord, right? That's the new thing. And one of the new things in college football this year is quarterbacks get an inline helmet communication to one of the coaches. And he misspoke at first and was like, oh, it'll be the head coach. And he laughed and immediately was like, it will not be me. He was like, I'll tell Kyle to go out there, and then he'll be on with Nixon and Campanelli, and that'll be it. And he laughed. Other head coaches would be like, oh, it's going to be me. Or even if it's someone else, like, I'm going to have a line in there too, so I can make it. Like that's just a fact. Like, there are head coaches across the country that are going to want to be the only one talking to their quarterback like that. So I think that's interesting. But Dart, right? We can't talk about Fran and this program without talking about Dart. And I want to set the tone a little bit with what I thought was a slightly different answer we've gotten about how he formed this on Monday, or like why he formed it. Again, I'm just going to read it off because I don't have the audio here, but he said, if someone was asked, how would you explain Fran? And they could say, well, he's detailed, he's very accountable, he's relentless, he's a tough guy, I'd be cool with that. So I figured, okay, if we could take these and try to allow every player to live that way in everything they do, then I think you'll have a bunch of successful young men. That's all it was. How do I get these young men to become grown men and to be successful? And when tough times come, what can they fall back on that will keep them on track? And I want to play this too, from my reporting on the Brown feature, just to kind of give you a picture again, like, of just like how much Brown cares about these players and just not even his players, but just young athletes as a whole, not just as athletes, but as young men too.
It's always meant everything to me. My wife will tell you. I make it an emphasis. Like, I help so many kids go to college that don't come to the college I'm at. Like, I'm always on the phone talking and trying to set them up with another coach, calling other coaches to do that. I just think like that's my job, to do that, and just to push them to be closer to the man above, no matter what their religion is. Just pushing them to go do that, like telling them like, yo, this is the way to success. Because everybody calls me with those, hey, my son Fran, how do I do this? Hey, how do we get this done? Like, I'm trying to get them to go. And when you got somebody calling you and they need help with that kid to go be successful, like, there's no better feeling than being able to help someone and not get anything in return. And when you go do that from the kindness of your heart, and you're not worrying about the return, then, like, I feel that's when you got to go hard, and that's where to be at. But it's my job to keep going. It's my job to continue to push. It's my job to help Elijah Robinson become a head football coach. So we got two of us now and not just one. So that's another big thing that I get a chance to work with him, being from there.
Brent, what are some ways, like some tangible ways that you would say we've seen Fran kind of push these players towards those dark tenets of detailed, accountable, relentless, tough?
They did a great job showing that a bit on All Access this week. The things that are on, like it's on the wall now, and here's what we mean by that. And they kind of cut the guys watching film. And there's, I think it was James Villano, the special teams coach, citing something specific that they have to do. Accountable is, we've seen it at practice, guys that get called out, and it's not in a negative way, but you're under a microscope here, and they know they're constantly going to be called out by coaches. Not that other coaches don't do that, but by hammering this message, they know that they've got to be on point, right? Relentless. I mean, look, we've seen that in football before, but by emphasizing it, these guys know there's no walking in practice. The minute you let up, we were at practice the other day. I think it was the last one that we were at that was open, and Chase Simmons, and I don't want to pick on you, Chase, but it's just an example, went a little too slow for Robinson's liking, and he got on him. He said, no, we don't do that. There's not a moment of letting up here. And tough. I mean, how do you exemplify toughness, right? I guess we'll see when these guys really get into it, and it's week 7 and you've gone through some battles here and everybody's got bumps and bruises, and now you have to go to class and you have to do all these things that this mission statement says. It's a weird analogy, Emily, but I kind of think of a NASCAR driver. Whenever a NASCAR driver does an interview, like no matter what, they work their sponsors in. No matter what, you could ask them, like, what's on the, you could ask them any question in the world, and they're somehow going to loop back. Well, I want to thank Kellogg's, and I want to thank Budweiser. No matter what Fran says, and now we're hearing it from the players, Dart will come up, right? If you work in the corporate world, sometimes you kind of roll your eyes at whatever the mission statement is in the corporate world, but this stuff works in football. It just does. It works in football more than any other sport, what that mission statement is. And it has just been embedded in the heads of these guys for 9 months, and now they're living it in 9 short months. The ultimate test comes during the season. But I got to give Fran credit, because sometimes these things don't work. They just don't. But this one feels like it works, and you could put it on a T-shirt, and you got the fan base doing it, and you got the hashtag, and that's what Syracuse football is now. It was Orange is the New Fast before that kind of went off a cliff, and some other ones, New York's college team, and some others that I've seen along the way here. But so far, so good on this one, because when you got the players kind of saying it without being prompted to, you know that it's kind of seeping through their pores.
You know why I think it works, and it's not just working in the program, but it's working in the community. And honestly, it's working with us, because usually 9 months in, we would not still be talking about something that a coach is saying like this. That just kind of feels like, oh, like a mission statement type stuff, is because it's accessible. It's realistic. Even if you are losing games, there are still ways you have to be detailed. Like all of those tenets still apply. Like lose, win, if you're not on the football field, if you're on the football field, if you're working in journalism, if you're working in a corporate office, if you're doing community service, like those are just 4 like basic life tenets and like qualities that like any person can have. It makes this program inclusive and accessible to players of all backgrounds, right? Like community members of all backgrounds. And right, like that's again like who Fran is. He's just a relatable guy. Is like, this is a guy who did not come from some like white collar neighborhood where he grew up with like 3 cars and bedrooms for everyone in his family and kind of had like just a cushy path to being like a coach. Like, no, like he lived in an urban area where there was crime, where he had to deal with family members, like moving around with different family members and different things happening. And he got held back in high school. Like he is relatable on a much different level that I think a lot of college football coaches are today. And that's not like a dig at any college football coaches who were brought up white collar or anything like that, but it's just different for Fran. And I think the fact that it's so different and he has been able to get to where he is despite that is why this has been so successful for him before he's even seen the field, right? And like, again, like honeymoon period, but like I think he'll still like we'll still come to the end of the season regardless of what the record could be. Like even if they did just finish 6-6 or God forbid below 6-6, like I think people would still feel like very strongly about in a positive way, very strongly positive way about who Fran is.
And who Fran is, there's something that you brought up earlier that I wanted to circle back to. As much as we're in an era, and Syracuse has some of these players, I think we're going to see more guys taken in the 2025 NFL draft than we've seen in recent memory, right? As much as you have the Kyle McCords and the Fidel Diggs and the OGs and the high-level players, Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, et cetera, LaQuint Allen, there's still a lot of football players that this is it. This is the highest level they're going to go. Mm-hmm. They have parents and grandparents and families. Fran knows their names. He was talking about a couple of freshmen we asked him about the other day, Marcellus Barnes and Malachi James, said their parents, right? Said their names, shout out to them. I think that's part of that genuineness that people feel. These are still college kids. As much as we have taken the student athlete part of this out of it in so many ways with the discussion of all the money and conference realignment and everything, the vast, vast majority of these players are still college kids. They have parents. And now I'm the parent of a college kid, and I understand how they feel more than ever. I understand this, and they're student athletes, and they're in, a bigger spotlight than your average student. So it's a little bit of a different life, but that means something to people. And Emily, I wanted to ask you something. We've certainly heard this from Fran, but having been there in his house, met his family, Uncle Charlie, and everybody, religion, his faith seems to be very important to him. He's brought it up before, and it was to Dino as well, but how much do you think that has connected him with just everything? The community, recruits, families, regardless of what your faith is. I just feel like that's been like almost like the secret ingredient here. He's open about it, and I think people that are also of his faith appreciate that and connect to it.
Yeah, well, one character who didn't really end up making it too much into the story is Fran's grandma, who was very involved in his upbringing, right? Because his mom was 13, 14 when she had him. So Fran's grandma was like another mom and was there for him growing up. And she was the family's anchor in their faith. And she used to tell Fran, and I think I got chills like the first time I heard this because it's just so funny, and he sees it as like a manifestation. But like she like used to tell him like Jesus lives in your heart. You're the first grandbaby. Like you're gonna be special. You're gonna be special, Fran. And like would repeat that over and over to him, and he kind of sees that as like, I mean, it's like the first person who believes in him. It's the first person who's kind of manifesting towards this. And when his grandma passed of cancer when he was in middle school, I believe, or early high school. And Fran went through hardship with his faith after that. Like he said he didn't want to go to church as often, and he kind of pulled back a little bit. And it wasn't really until he was an adult that he started to kind of reconnect with that side of himself and his family's history, and kind of found out that there are different ways to like build your faith and acknowledge your faith and have a relationship with God than just like going to church every Sunday. But that he said, I'm trying to take a little time with this because I'm trying to remember everything. But like he said that his big takeaway though was like, even if you don't need to go to like a formal service or something like that, like you need people around you. Like you need the connection with other people to be able to build your connection with whatever God or higher power you believe in. And so I think, again, like it's that realism and him being so realistic about like he hasn't been perfect in his faith, and he did waver for a while because of his grandma's passing, and he does understand that like not everyone is compelled to go to church every Sunday, but they might still believe in something like that. Like it's just he is open to all of those different things that come, and it's not just, well, you need to be devout in your faith. Like he does like obviously push for that as a man of God, as he often says he is. But I think again, it's that openness to hearing probably his players out. And, we haven't heard too much like from the players about like how he approaches this. We knew a little bit about how Dino did, but like, I think it's that openness. And again, not to pound it over the head, but that realism about like everyone on his team is going to be in a different place with that. Like there are guys who are all different faiths. There are guys who don't practice religion. There are guys who maybe did as a kid and have kind of pulled away from it or just aren't interested in going to church on Sunday mornings, right? Or different religions. And so I think it's that openness. But you're right that it is a big core value of his.
Well, any community, any religious community it's that word, it's that community. And I feel like Fran has done a good job of saying, this is who I am and this is what I believe in, but we're all part of this community. Like the when they break the huddle, they showed it a few times in All Access, and we've heard it being a practice. They say 1, 2, 3 family. So what are you doing to put that into practice, right? Goes back to Dart a little bit. But I was just curious about that because it comes up often enough that you can tell how important it is to him, but also he puts it out in a way that's like, this is who I am, but everybody's welcome kind of thing. And I think that's important. And again, if you're leaving your kid with this coach, because that's who he spends the most time with for the next 4 years, for those that are not going to go to the pros and like this is it for them, if you connect through that community, that's important to a lot of people. And like some don't practice it, so it's not that everybody's got a different connection they make with Fran in that way. But I was just kind of curious how that worked, because I would imagine in reporting that story that I felt like a lot of his family would do that. So that was a good story about grandma. And I think we've all had those moments, no matter what your level of religious practice is, if at all. I think we all doubt our faith if you have it at some point. Something happens. Certainly people pass away and even pets and things of that nature. So that was really insightful, but that Fran shared that with you.
Yeah. So those are all things obviously that we've kind of started seeing in real time and in practice in the off season. But I wanted to kind of like talk about like what we've heard from Brown to make us believe or make the public believe that like there is like a future here, a long-term future here for him, and that future is filled with things that Syracuse fans have been hoping for, right? Like conference championships, playoff berths, national championships. Brent, I know you brought up Doug Marrone and kind of his opening press conference and how he said like this is a dream job for him. And I was wondering if you could just kind of do the comparison for us of like some of those comments and some of what we heard from Brown and maybe what your initial thought was. Like, were you skeptical about that at first? Has that changed for you? Just kind of walk us through that.
What Doug Marrone said was what needed to be said. They needed just a full cleansing, and having somebody that was an alum, I thought got a lot of people on board right away to believe in something again, because it just, I don't want to just, God rest his soul, beat on Greg Robinson here, but he just did everything wrong. And it wasn't all his fault. This guy was hired very late in the coaching cycle when all the college coaches had been gone. He brought in a lot of NFL people. What reminds me of it is Doug tried to do this and it was scattered between Shafer and Dino afterwards, is just simple things, connecting with alumni, right? Fran from day one said, alumni are welcome back here. We want you around, and not because we want your money. We just want you to be a part of this thing. I thought that was smart and it was genuine. And right from day one, as you brought up earlier, Emily, he brings up Pasqualoni and DeLeon. So that opens up some ears. We saw people at Fran's opening press conference I had not seen around the program in 8 years to tie it directly to Dino. So that felt like, okay, this is smart. You're not just plopping somebody in a chair because they'll be on camera at a press conference, which I think they did at a couple of the other introductory press conferences, frankly. Like, it felt like they wanted to be there. That was smart. I thought it was smart of Fran. He had a genuine moment too. You brought up his background, Emily. So I can't remember what the exact question was, but remember that moment in the presser? He's like, do you see how much money this man's paying me? Like, it was, Fran was like, how cool is this? I get to coach college football and make probably, what is he making? $4 million a year, something like that. I think people connected with that. Like, that's cool. You don't take something like that for granted. So I think we quickly found out because, I mean, the best years Marrone had were 2 8-5 seasons and the Pinstripe Bowl twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Shafer had a little peak with one bowl game, then it went down. Dino, the surge started with beating Virginia Tech in year 1, beating number 2 Clemson after that in year 2, and the peak with the 10-win season. Tommy DeVito he did everything right. 4-star recruit, the heir apparent to Eric Dungy, everything that he was supposed to be. But we saw the breakdown in the most important position, Emily, the offensive line. So I think through all of this, to make a football reference I know we're thinking broadly here, but in the trenches, this team looks as good as any team I have seen from any of those coaches I just mentioned. That's on paper. That's what we see in front of us, but that's important. I mean, just look at Demetrius Weatherspoon, Big Spoon as they call him, and Savion Washington as McCord's tackles. I haven't seen anything like that here. I can't remember the last time. So through all this philosophy and dart and who the man is, Fran brought in some real players in the most important position on the team, the offensive line and somewhat on the defensive line. The depth chart showed a lot of oars on the second team, so we'll see how they're incorporated in. But right off the bat, they look like a football team. And he did that all in 9 months. That's pretty incredible. That's something that, and let's be honest, Marrone and Shafer and Dino didn't have the resources to do this that Fran does, but man, he took full advantage of it and built a team that I think's ready to go, Emily. They look the part now. All those unknown factors have to play out, including how Fran coaches, right?
Yeah, keeping with the football stuff for a second, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the family hints that he is planning to lay roots here. It is with the football stuff, like there's no sense of complacency from him, right? And it starts with just like the fact, like you mentioned, all the oars on the depth chart. Competitions at those key positions, backup quarterback, the cornerbacks, the defensive tackles, like position battles are going to go on all season because he does not want any of those guys to get complacent and think, oh, I'm sitting on the sideline, or, oh, I'm okay, I've won a starting job, like I'm going to be playing all season. No complacency there. And he also alluded Monday, like moving forward, there's no complacency in his like plans for future off seasons, right? This was an answer to a question that Chris asked, our colleague Chris Carlson. And Fran said, the off season will get harder every year because there's a new standard. You can't do the same thing again and expect it to go. They always talk about you either evolving or you die. I don't really want to say die. Either you evolve or you go.
Right.
But my mindset, they say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Nah. If it's broke, break it. If it's working, break it and fix it back again. Break it. Let's make it even better. Things may have worked and things may have gone the right way, but let's break it all up. Let's figure it all out and see how we can make it better. That is the mindset you need to have in just a football program normally, right? Like the best game we saw last year, or at least the most interesting game we saw last year, was the one where they broke the norm and went against Pitt and brought them this old-timey offense that no one had seen out of Syracuse, at least anytime recently. And like they went against the norm and weren't complacent about, hey, well, we don't have a quarterback, we're just going to do what we can. Like they came up with something new. So you need that on a football team regardless, but also you need that in college football as a bigger landscape today. You cannot be complacent when teams are moving conferences, when conferences are vying to like get more money, like just all of this stuff that's going on in college football, when you have to battle for transfers every year, you cannot be complacent. And so that kind of motor from Fran, I think, is very important for what the future of this looks like.
I know I've brought this up before, but I've got to reiterate it here, Emily. The difference in attitude there, the message you're sending to everybody, okay? You're on the attack. You recognize it. Like you said, you're not complacent. You are acknowledging this is the way it is. When Dino brought it up, it was defeatist. It was, he had given up. It was all our players get bought away. Like you could tell, like he was not in that battle. Whereas Fran, he's Braveheart, man. He painted his face. He grabbed his sword. And he's running head first into what this is. I love that quote. I'm glad you reminded me of that from the presser when he said, if it's broke, break it. If it's not broke, you got to break it. And he gets what this is and is embracing it, because why fight it? You can't go against the tide here. It is what it is. not to steal an old expression there, but this is what college football is. You either get on the bus or you say all our players get bought away and end up being the offensive coordinator at Arizona. I mean, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, there are like even more like I think like tangible. I get like not tangible in like the sense that you can touch them, obviously, which is the literal definition of those words, but like very specific examples. I think Fran has given, at least in my eyes, that make me feel confident that he truly does want to stay here for a while. Maybe it doesn't end up being 13 years or whatever I think was the exact time frame he said in his press conference. And obviously some of that is out of his control as a football coach, like Wild Hack or whoever is AD in 10 years could be in charge of that. But this is a moment from our interview in New Jersey. It's an in-between moment. We were changing batteries in the camera, but the mic was still on. So I was kind of just chatting with him. We had just talked about his final regular season game with Georgia, which is what's at Georgia Tech. Obviously, Syracuse had been at Georgia Tech the week before that. That was when Dino was fired the following morning. But that's just to paint the picture a little bit. We're talking about Georgia Tech Stadium and the atmosphere there a little bit.
Nice stadium, though.
Yeah, it is nice. You get a good view of the Atlanta skyline, which is nice.
I can't wait till we get in the dome.
Yeah. It's loud.
I wish the dome could open.
I know. I think that's like the one biggest thing I missed. So I went to Missouri, so obviously SEC outdoor stadium and stuff like that. And that's the one thing I miss is I liked watching the sunset at games or seeing.
We're gonna get it one
everything.
day. We're gonna get this right. Talk to JMA. I go win. Let's open the dome.
Yeah.
They might all love it. JMA will be like, why not?
Right. Especially like the early like Syracuse in September and October is beautiful. Like the weather is perfect for that type of stuff. So Fran is already thinking about where the dome seats are barely in. No butts have sat in them yet. And Fran is already thinking about what's the next thing we can do? How can we make this game day experience better? Honestly, how can we get more butts in the seats? Because I do think a big reason some of those early games in the season lack attendance is because people are like, well, I'd rather be out apple picking or going 100%. To the pumpkin patch or like
Amen.
Doing things out in the sun. Like that's what we've said the past few years. And obviously we'll see if it changes. But that to me is one of the most like damning, honestly, examples that like he wants to be here. Like that's not the best word, but like that tells me that he does truly have a vision of what this program looks like under him. That's 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, because that's not something that they're going to get done here in 2 years.
Yeah, that's the thing. If I'm Wild, I'm like, Fran, see that we just fixed that roof. So retractable. Yeah, we're going to have to get back to you on that. But in theory, he's 100% right. Like, Emily, you have seen me do this. Mm-hmm. We'll be walking into a game and I will just take a deep breath like, come on, man. It's 3:00 in the afternoon. It is 80 degrees. The sun is shining. September and October weather at Central New York is perfect. Mm-hmm. And we're about to be indoors for 4 hours, right? That's the trade-off you have with the dome. And we like this happens every year. People grumble about attendance because there's typically a lot of games in September. And I don't know. I guess my answer is, don't you live here? For those that are local, like we have to soak in these nice days before winter hits. That's why basketball is always successful. And that's why the attendance is always great, because it's the middle of freaking winter and you want to be inside to see something, right? But I love how Fran is thinking ahead there. And how much of this do you think, Emily, if I recall correctly, goes back? I don't know if it was the presser or maybe some other comments. Maybe you've talked to him about it with Fran. Isn't his time frame, isn't that tied to his daughter?
Mm-hmm.
When she gets older, he kind of feels like that's when it's going to be time to get out of coaching. So I think he's kind of trying to jam in as much as he can before she reaches a certain age, because she just turned 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him hitting on that. Like, I want to do a lot of this, but I'm going to get out of coaching at some point. And I'm sorry I'm being vague here, but I just remember him tying that to his daughter somehow.
Yeah, no, he said in that intro, and then he's said it again to me like throughout all of the times I've talked to him since, like, yeah, like seeing Ivy grow up in one place and letting her have like a full childhood here, it is a big deal to him and something that family wants. Obviously, like Fran Jr., especially their oldest, like he had to move around through a lot of different spots. He's at St. Francis University now, and so that's close to Syracuse. And Fran has talked about getting to go and see him more, and that the schedule aligns more often than it did when they were at Georgia last year. And he's got 3 more years there. I know Tiara is hoping that he can maybe transfer for some of those later years, but they got that. Their middle son, Brayden, like he's in a little league here. You saw on All Access, Fran go in and coaching, and Brayden getting to play with friends that he's known from different spots because Fran brought their dads onto his staff and stuff like that. So the family, like Fran wants his family to have like a very stable, structured life. And that's a hard thing to do in college football. And one of the few things you can do to make it stable is stay in one place for as long as you can. And I think the one other tidbit I'll say that I think is really telling about the commitment to the area and the family staying here is, so Tiara is a registered nurse, and she has a certificate in anesthesiology. And she, like, obviously being a nurse, you have to get registered in different states and stuff. And so she's always been registered in New Jersey, obviously, and does some work when they go back down there occasionally. But she hadn't like registered in Texas. She hadn't registered in Georgia. She's registering in New York. Like when the first time I talked to her, she's like, yeah, I'm getting ready to go take my New York registration so that I can do some work here and build my career back up, because she is very career driven as well. And so like that's something she wouldn't be doing, I don't think, if they didn't think they were going to be here for a while and it was realistic for her to be staying and doing that.
That's interesting. I just wonder how much that will be tested if Fran does have success here and other people recognize it and say, well, if you can do it there, we want you to do it here. And oh, by the way, we're going to pay you twice what Syracuse can pay you. Syracuse is still at a big disadvantage when it comes to paying their staff and everything that it takes to be a successful program. Fran's doing the best with what he has, and it feels like they're building up certain things, don't get me wrong, but they're still at a major, major disadvantage to an SEC program swooping in and be like, yeah, I see what you're doing there at Syracuse. Why don't you come over here and do it for double or maybe even triple what you're making there at Syracuse? Just something to think about.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I mean, I think like really like all that we've talked about, like when we're kind of laying this out, right, is like there's a real sense of realism here, which I know might sound silly considering we're talking about future national championships or conference championships and stuff. And those are just not things that Syracuse has experienced in a while. But it's the realism, and it's how grounded he is in these kind of core tenets, the dark tenets, but also like grounded in family and grounded in community and grounded in faith. Like he's just a really down to earth dude, like, which is what you got. I hope people got from that story what I certainly got from hanging out with him and all the times we interact with him on a more normal basis. But yeah, certainly everyone's excited for football and we will see it on the field. But I think what we know about the off the field stuff and the intangibles, like certainly this is a man who has a realistic setup for moving this program forward.
Well, thanks for doing that great story, and thanks for sharing some extra tidbits here. That's the benefit of being a listener to this podcast, is you get some extra stuff. And I think to this point, we have heard everything that we need to hear about Fran. Now it's time to find out what kind of coach he is. But honestly, that's a big part to you, Emily, for doing that kind of story. You've wanted to do that pretty much since we walked out of that press conference. And man, you put in the work and you went to New Jersey and you have put blood, sweat, and tears into this because you could see Fran at a community event and some of the things that we noted. But I think you shined a light on the best way we could find out, thanks to Uncle Charlie and everybody, of what kind of person he is, because you mentioned how real he is and the connection he's trying to make. He's trying to bring that into his football program. And I'm as curious as anybody to see if it continues and it happens, because man, as we have seen time and again, weird stuff happens during a football season. So I am as fascinated as anybody to see how this goes.
Yeah. And shout out Aunt Levita and her husband, Fran's Aunt Levita. She said they watched the pod. We took a selfie.
Oh, what's up, Aunt Levita? Great to see you.
She's watching.
All right, there you have it, friends. The latest episode of Syracuse Sports. Emily and I certainly went in depth there on Fran Brown. Hope it gave you a better perspective of the man that's about to take over Syracuse football. Syracuse, Ohio. Yes, we'll be doing a post-game show after Syracuse and Ohio on Saturday night. We'll be doing post-game shows throughout the season. They are live, but certainly you want to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Syracuse Sports with Brent Axe, our Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube page. Make sure you're subscribed to that. Follow that, so whenever we do a live broadcast, whenever a new podcast pops up, there it is for you to listen and watch on demand whenever you want. Big shout out to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their terrific questions, opinions, and insight, the things you want us to look into, the questions you want us to ask Fran Brown and Syracuse football players, the things you want us to look into, and just a great back and forth, Top 5 Fridays, and the fun things that we exchange back and forth. Being a Syracuse Sports Insider means you text me directly. I text you directly, guys. It's not a group text, okay? So you don't have, in this case, there'd be well over 300 people in a group chat. No, we're not doing that. You text me, I text you, and the entire group certainly gets insight and opinions and the things that we do send our Syracuse Sports Insiders collectively, right? The daily text that you get on all things Syracuse sports from me, from Emily. Sign up today. It's just $3.99 a month, less than $1 a week. Come on, what a deal. You could try it free for 2 weeks as well. And we're certainly looking forward to hearing from our Syracuse Sports Insiders now that real football is here. Thanks to Emily Leiker for her amazing story about Fran Brown and sharing those extra tidbits with us today. And thanks to you guys, as always, for checking out the pod. All right. So as mentioned, with our local music tie, and it doesn't have to be local in terms of Syracuse, New York. I mean, your original music, no matter where you're from. Keep it coming, guys. All the details are in the show notes about how you can get in touch with me to send your original music played here on this podcast with your permission. In this case, I reached out to this band. I loved them so much, and I wanted to play them. Let's go out with a little Strangers from Paper Rabbit, their new single off their new album. Check it out, guys. They are amazing. You're amazing, too, because you were a listener and a watcher of Syracuse Sports Today. We'll catch you next time, guys.
Time was never on our side. It was never enough to keep us apart. strangers in